We'll go ahead and call to order the first meeting of the Interim Joint Committee on Transportation. This time I'd ask Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Berg.
Present remotely.
In district? Are you in your district?
I'm about a mile outside of my district.
Okay. Senator Embry.
Present in the room.
Senator Hornback. Senator Smith. Senator Storm.
Present in the room.
Senator Turner.
Present in the room.
Senator Wheeler.
Present in the room.
Senator Wilson. Senator Wise.
Present in the room.
Senator Yates.
Present remotely from district.
Representative Bojanowski.
I'm present remotely and I'm at the beach.
Representative Branscombe.
Present in the room.
Representative Bratcher. Representative Bridges.
Present in the room.
Representative Carney. Representative Dixon.
Present remotely in my district.
Representative Fleming.
Present.
Representative Goforth.
Present in the room.
Representative Hale.
Present in the room.
Representative Heverin.
Present in the 18th district.
Representative Regina Huff.
Present in the room.
Representative Thomas Huff.
Present in the room.
Representative Lewis.
Present remotely from the 90th district.
Representative Maddox.
Present in person.
Representative McCool.
Present in the room.
Representative McPherson.
Present in the room.
Representative Miller. Representative Santoro.
Present in the district 60.
Representative Smith. Representative Stevenson. Representative Tackett Lafferty.
Present in the room.
Representative Thomas.
Present in the room.
Representative Westrom.
Remotely from the 79th.
Representative Wheatley.
Here in the room.
Co-Chair Higdon.
Here in the room.
Chairman Upchurch.
Here in the room. We do have a quorum duly constituted to do business. I was supposed to have read this statement here from staff, had me all prepped up and ready to go, and I forgot to read it, but basically it was unmute your mic when you during roll call, and then if everyone would mute their mics back if since we've already gone through the roll call, and then if you need to speak or if you have a question, please use the chat function and send a message to Brandon White, who will be monitoring and get those messages up to us, and then we can call on you. And with that, welcome. I think the only person during roll call who had a drop mic moment was Representative Bojanowski. We want to make sure that she is enjoying herself at the beach. We'll try to not go too long so you can get out and have some fun and sun and all that as quickly as possible. But first off,
Thank you.
you know, we want to take care of you today.
Appreciate it.
First on the agenda is Sarah Jackson with the Real ID. She's the project manager. Give us an update on driver's license issuance and the establishment of the regional offices. So please come forward. Just introduce yourselves for the record, and then the floor is yours.
Sarah Jackson, and I'm the Real ID project manager with the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. And with me, Matt Cole, who is the commissioner of the Department of Vehicle Regulation. I really want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for offering us this opportunity to update you on our progress on transitioning circuit court clerks off driver licensing and credentialing responsibilities. But in order to give you an accurate picture as to our activities, I would like to remind the committee that the Transportation Cabinet's Division of Driver Licensing is juggling 2 major projects simultaneously. We're carrying out, on one hand, the mandate of the Real ID Act, and on the other hand, we are transitioning circuit clerks off of driver's licensing functions following House Bill 453, the 2020 session. As Real ID project manager, I'm going to provide a very brief Real ID update and also update you on the KYTC regional offices we have stood up. Then the Department of Vehicle Regulation Commissioner Matt Cole is going to report on the circuit clerk's transition to date, including the process we go through each month in determining what clerks come off for the following month. I'd like to direct your attention. We've handed out a fact sheet which we're going to continue to update as we progress. And it provides a recap of where we are and where we're next headed. First of all, with regards to Real ID, you will see at the top there are 2 very important deadlines in the top box. Due to the pandemic and the ground necessarily lost by many states in advancing the Real ID programs in their states, the Real ID deadline, the enforcement deadline, was moved up 19 months, and it's been moved to May 3rd of 2023. This move was made by the Department for Homeland Security. Notice was provided to states in April. We've updated our websites and information and our messaging about it. But I would remind you that the last enforcement date we were operating under was this October of 2021. So what does that mean? Well, we've got just under 2 years to make sure that all Kentuckians who are eligible for a Real ID driver's license or a Real ID identification card and who wish to have one and use one can get it during those 2 years prior to that enforcement deadline. The enforcement deadline means that on May 3rd, when you walk up to board a plane on a domestic flight, TSA will ask you for a form of Real ID. By way of reminder, and this is really important for, well, let me first say our messaging right now is make your Real ID plan now. Our messaging has been that for this past year, but we're going to still emphasize make your Real ID plan now, not on the cusp, the night before or the month before the enforcement deadline. By way of reminder, Kentuckians with driver's licenses have been placed on a staggered 4-year cycle, meaning that about 1/4 of Kentucky's drivers renew every year in a 4-year cycle. Now, why is that important? I just want to let you all know that we now have, over the next 2 years, the ability to cycle through 50% of scheduled renewals during the next 2 years, which is half of our drivers who will be offered and educated. If they don't know already, they'll be offered the opportunity to get a Real ID when they come in during their renewal. So that's really important. That gives us a huge running start with folks. The extra time also gives us the time to continue to focus standing up additional regional offices and increasing staffing at those offices. It gives us additional time for messaging, for getting the word out, for educational opportunities, partnering with local governments. And the extension is also affording DHS and TSA an additional amount of time to approve additional forms of Real ID. Now, to give you an example, in Kentucky, you're not required to get a Real ID driver license or a Real ID identification card in order to fly domestically if you have another form of acceptable Real ID, another form of Real ID. Currently, that could include a valid U.S. passport, a Department of Defense issued ID, and several other things that are listed on the TSA site. Now, to give you an example of this evolving list of other forms of Real ID, the Vhic card was just recently added to the TSA site, and many of you will know this card as a veteran's health identification card. And that's going to help a whole nother segment of Kentucky. In other words, maybe they don't fly a lot for business, or maybe they don't anticipate a need to use a real ID, but they've got that form of real ID that's acceptable in lieu of a real ID driver's license. So the extra time gives everybody more time to make a plan. The people administering this, and as well as the Kentuckians. So with the extra time to issue this, and the extra concerns I've just gone over, the advantages of this extension, I am beyond confident that we are going to be able to ensure that all Kentuckians will be well prepared for the 5/3/2023 enforcement date. Now, the driver licensing regional offices, if you'll look at the fact sheet, I'd like to move into that briefly. On the right side of the fact sheet is a listing of all driver licensing regional offices currently stood up across the state. The date by which we are required under House Bill 453 to transition all circuit clerks' credentialing issuance duties off is June 30 of 2022. That's also up in that deadline box. And move to a regional model. That's the goal. That's where we're moving. That's where we're headed. Critical to this project is expanding the initially conceived network and functions of those regional offices. It's my understanding that when the primary function, with the primary function in mind being real IDs, the original number planned for offices, regional offices, was about 15. And we will now end up with a number considerably higher than that, at least 25, we believe. It's still being determined. I would direct your attention to this listing of offices. There are 16 offices plus one temporary office that's by appointment only. And there are more offices in various stages. These offices are open and they're busy. In March 2020, at the start of the pandemic, we had only opened a handful of these offices. They're not quite at full issuance capacity due to the pandemic and the Healthy at Work guidelines we have in place. But as we now move off the Healthy at Work guidelines, we're going to be able to fully ramp up each office, opening and staffing all issuance stations. So these regional offices don't just issue real IDs. They issue all types of credentials. And it's a clear pivot from their original conception, and they're absorbing circuit court credentialing responsibilities as they transition, various counties transition off each month. We call this next level licensing. Whether you go to one of these offices for a standard license or a real ID, and Commissioner Cole is going to discuss some of these next level features. He's going to share with you how we're progressing, but just before he does, I would like to let you know that I've now been with the cabinet a little over a year now, and I have never been part of a team with such cumulative expertise, such steadfast focus on the project, and the overriding concern I see on the team members at every meeting, at every decision, and every day is that they are considering the overall experience for each Kentuckian. Moving to a regional model is a challenge on all sides. It's a challenge for customers. It's a challenge for a cabinet that has never even dabbled much in the issuance of driver's licensing. But I am proud of what's been accomplished and excited for what Kentuckians are going to ultimately be the recipient of. So with that, I'll turn over to, unless you want to take questions now, I could turn over to Commissioner Cole and we'll take questions at the end. What would you prefer, Mr. Chairman?
Let's just go ahead and take questions at the end.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for having us here today. Like Sarah mentioned, in House Bill 453, the 2020 legislative session tasked KYTC with transitioning credential issuance from the circuit clerk offices to KYTC regional offices. Sarah also previously mentioned about the offices that we had set up since the pandemic. That was one of our bigger challenges while the world was shut down. We pressed forward and were able to open many more offices just to make it more available for all the constituents. As an example, for Indiana, our neighbor to the north, who is widely considered to have one of the better driver's license issuing programs, they have a similar landmass size, a population of 6.8 million people. They're only serviced by 18 regional offices. While Kentucky, at 4.4 million, will have at least 25 and perhaps closer to 30. And what that means is there'll be more convenience for our citizens than most states as we continue to add more Real ID locations. Over 20 counties have been transitioned effective May 24th, with 10 more being transitioned on June 28th. And approximately 10 additional counties will be transitioned each month going forward. We will have all 120 counties completed prior to the June 30th, 2022 date. As we select each wave of counties about 6 to 8 weeks ahead of their transition deadline, we determine which regional offices have the available bandwidth to absorb that volume. That's how we kind of come up with the formula to make sure that we know when we close down the circuit clerk offices that we're not going to put the constituents or citizens in more of a line. We want to make sure that we have plenty of bandwidth to give, and as we add more offices and more people in the offices, then that just makes things easier for people to go on and get an appointment online and show up for an appointment that they have selected on what time and day works best for them. One good new technology that we'll be releasing soon will be our online renewal program. That will allow anyone that's in their 6-month renewal window to be able to renew online as long as there are no material changes to their license, such a name or address change. They will be able to do that from the comfort of their home, on the road, on a cell phone, anywhere they go, whatever works best for them. We'll also continue to work on our pop-up driver's license portable units, to where we will be making appointments to come to the counties that do not have regional offices to visit people that maybe aren't as familiar or comfortable with technology. So we're really looking for options to provide something for everyone, regardless on their level of comfort for technology. We are working with local officials to set up that program so that way they can provide us a best place that they recommend, and we'll bring the equipment and the staffing and take care of the rest. KYTC continues to ramp up all of our work staff in compliance with the Healthy at Work guidelines as they continue to evolve. Kentucky State Police has also decided to transition their driver testing program to something that closely resembles our regional model. We'll continue to work with them in any way necessary, but we do think that cohabitation in the same location is best due to our process and their process both being essential for credential issuance, with them still continuing to take care of the driver testing aspect of the process. In conclusion, due to our diligence during the pandemic, we are ahead of schedule with opening regional offices, and we're also right on schedule for the closure of the circuit clerk offices in accordance with the current statute. With the additional online renewal being launched any day now and the start of our pop-up portable units later this year, we are in excellent position to provide the citizens of the Commonwealth one of the best driver's license experiences in the nation. At this time, we'll be glad to take any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure we've probably got a few questions. Just one right off the top of my head. What on the opening up of the regional offices, what kind of criteria are we using as we pick a county to put a regional office? Are we looking at the geography,
Absolutely.
travel patterns of the area? I mean,
Yes.
we can look at a map and say, well, Lexington, Louisville, Frankfurt, obviously, and
Yes.
places like that. But I mean, are we looking at the travel patterns of those particular counties? And
Absolutely. We take that into consideration with population and geographic coverage. So if you look at the map and you see the 17 locations now, you can see where the holes are, and that's where we're working to add more, because we want something to be convenient for everyone.
Okay.
And one restriction that we've seen in the past is citizens used to only be able to go to their circuit clerk office in the county that they reside in, where now they can go to any office, whether they're traveling, vacation, anything that works best for them. If they just have a day trip to the big city, then they can use any one they like.
Okay, thank you. And I think Senator Higdon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Sarah and Matt, thank you all for being here today. And we can't talk about this enough to get the information out to the citizens of Kentucky about this is a sea change as far as the way we issue driver's licenses. And really, it's really good that Real ID is kind of off the table right now. There's not a push so we can transition into these driver's licenses. I think a little maybe is not as much pressure going forward. So thank you for your work. I know you all have been very diligent on trying to make sure that there's no hiccups. I do have a county that, as Sarah, I know you're aware of. We've talked a lot about Casey County, and that transition has been smooth. I've not received any complaints, and that's very good. And I hope all legislators have the same experience, because we want this to work, because this is important that it work. And I know you're doing everything you can to make sure that it does happen efficiently. The mobile units say it's going to be later in the year before they're up and running. Do you have a month specifically and can you tell us these per region, or how will these mobile units, and how often can we expect them to be in a community?
Absolutely. We're deploying them to 10 of our regional offices that are geographically spread out around the state. That way we'll be able to deploy from each one of those. And what we've done is we're broken them down into regions. So each of those regional offices that house the portable units will be responsible for the surrounding counties. And what we'll do, in accordance with local officials, we'll make sure that we set up periodic visits there that correspond with the number of population in the county that complies with the statute.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, can mind if I?
Certainly.
Okay, the online or the internet portion of issuing of license, is that currently up and running? And the challenges are worked out on that?
We have the pilot being launched sometime this week. We're going to watch it closely with kind of a small group of people just to proof out that everything's working. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll ramp it up to full launch. We'll make sure to inform everybody. We'll have a press release that'll go out. We'll also have a good conversation with the circuit clerks to keep them informed so they can be one of our biggest mouthpieces in this transition.
Is that pilot a particular county, or is it just selected individuals?
All of Kentucky. Every person who's been issued a driver's license who's wishing to, or a real ID, may renew online, provided there's no name or address change. And we did seek approval from DHS to get online renewal for the real IDs. But real IDs, you have to go in person first. And the circuit clerks have been, during the pandemic, Secretary Gray issued a mail-in, official order authorizing a mail-in program, and that will come to an end at the end of June. We see no need to be furthering that, because we will be up and running with the online renewals by then, and that's what we promised the circuit clerks. They're very happy, I think, with that.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, may I continue?
Yes.
I hope you reconsider that on the by mail, because we, as you know, we just appropriated $300 million because Kentucky has a lot of underserved and as far as internet is concerned. So, and we have people, believe it or not, I have constituents that are just computer illiterate, and they cannot use a computer. Now, they could go to the library, maybe the libraries that help them, but I really wish you could reconsider for those that just can't do the online application.
That's certainly something that we can keep in mind going forward. The biggest thing is we didn't want to continue the circuit clerks program because that would extend their involvement in it. So we need to wrap that program up to help move along the transition so we can get to the other stages. But it's certainly something that we can circle back around and visit later in the program.
Well, I would appreciate that.
Yes.
It is important.
Absolutely.
One final question, Mr. Chairman, and Sarah, you and I have talked about this, is IDs.
Yes, sir.
And have you had any more thoughts on IDs?
I think your question to me was about renewing IDs online, correct, sir?
Yes.
And what we have asked, the first iteration, I guess I'm using the right word, the first iteration of the online renewal only includes driver's licenses. But we have already made the request of the IT team to proceed to add ID cards as the next level in that program. And it may be a few months, but we definitely see that coming. We understand that the folks needing ID cards are non-drivers. A lot of them are non-drivers. So obviously it would be a great plus to get them added. But we were told that this online renewal had to be built one step at a time. So as soon as we get it launched with the driver's licenses, they're moving on to developing, is my understanding, with the ID cards.
Well, I just want to say I really appreciate you all being proactive on this. I know in the Casey County that you were on the radio there. You helped the folks there understand what was going on, and I think education is the key to a smooth transition. And thank you all for your work on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being diligent and let me ask all those questions.
Well, you are the co-chair, so.
Okay.
All right, next on the list is Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity. Hi, Ms. Jackson and Mr. Cole. I appreciate y'all coming in and give us an update on both those areas. Could you just give me a sort of a high altitude perspective on the number of real IDs that have been issued thus far, compared to total number of driver's licenses we have and so forth, and how you all might, I guess, get those eligible folks to participate in I don't want to say upgrade, but get a real ID.
Sure. We currently have 3.8 million credential holders in the state, and we've already surpassed 190,000 real IDs. For a state our size and urban-rural composition, they project that we would be somewhere between 30 and 40% of adoptants of a real ID credential. Right now, we're currently issuing over 65% of our credentials. So a lot of people that I think want them are being very proactive to come in and get them. Of course, we'll always have the opportunity for anyone to come in and get one when it suits them and their needs and their lifestyle. So we think that we may trend a little higher than that initial 30 to 40% adoption rate of other states, but we'll continue to keep that in mind as it transitions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Maybe offer a free COVID shot.
I'm sure Secretary Gray would approve of that plan.
Okay, next is Representative Stevenson.
It won't stay on. There we go. Hi. So I was in the Lexington office just on Friday, and it was running like a well-oiled machine. I was so happy to see that. It did take a while to get an appointment, but so do you think you can quantify how much of what we're seeing right now of folks trying to get in are backlogs from folks due to COVID?
I think some of it is certainly backlog. In other areas, we're seeing it because there are press releases that, for instance, Casey County, the circuit clerk won't be issuing after a certain date. We also are suffering a bit from the fact that we can't ramp up full staff,
Right.
But I think we're seeing a change to that. If I'm not mistaken, Lexington has 21 issuing stations, and they're not all filled.
Right.
So I'm pleased to hear that you saw a well-oiled machine because some days it doesn't always work that way. We're sharing space with state police, so there are people there for state police testing appointments.
Right.
There are people there like you who had an appointment with our office, and then we also take walk-ins. And that door manager position, it may be one of the toughest state government jobs there is at one of the larger offices. But we do think that this will subside, because remember, we're also opening more regional offices, more opportunities for folks. We've got to change the mindset that they go only in the county where they reside. We've got to encourage people that when they're headed to take a child back to Western Kentucky for school, they can get their license in Bowling Green. When you go to the scheduler on our website, all of those offices, some of them may be booked 3 and 4 weeks out, but all of the offices are available to you as a resident of Kentucky. And you can mesh it with your schedule and where you're headed and business or school. Kids that are in schools can renew their licenses now. A lot of our offices are in areas. We have, an office in Moorhead, Louisville, Lexington, Bowling Green, Northern Kentucky, where there are colleges and universities in this state, and they're not going to have to wait till they go home on vacation. So, Matt, do you have anything to add to the quantifying?
Well, absolutely. As we do ramp up the stations and we're able to man all of them, plus the online renewal, that's going to take that's going to take the foot traffic out of some of these offices. So a combination of all these initiatives combined, we're really looking toward a bright future. The wait times for getting an appointment will get smaller. Turnaround time will get quicker as we get a more seasoned staff. A lot of the people had never issued a driver's license, and we've had to kind of build that from the ground up. But we're starting to see that take hold and get traction. All the offices are operating at a very high level now, and as we're able to kind of beef that up, 21 workstations. Previously, Fayette County had 6 to 7 for the entire thing. So, we knew that with the surrounding traffic and other counties coming that we'd have to have plenty, and we feel like the plan is holding so far.
Great. One more question, Mr. Chair.
Certainly, mate.
So about how many are you at about half capacity now with the COVID restrictions, 60, 75%?
Probably around 14.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you all, and kudos to all the hard work. I know it hasn't been an easy transition, but we appreciate you guys.
No, thank you.
Next is Representative Wheatley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. And very much would like to share that message that make your Real ID plan now. Speaking of things that we've talked about with the regional offices, and there are additional regional offices coming, and I'm certainly making a plug for an additional office in my area, because some of the most challenged populations in Northern Kentucky, with transportation issues that are going on in Northern Kentucky, and specifically related to bridges and lack of public transportation routes to Burlington, Kentucky. As it sits now, I would imagine somebody trying to get from Newport, Kentucky or Covington, Kentucky, the northern tips of those two counties, to Burlington and back, it would almost be an all-day adventure to do it. So with that, I'm hoping that either Newport or Covington, preferably Covington, that's my district, but that would be considered. And you had mentioned there are 25 to 30 regional offices in the works, but we have 18 listed. So I'm just hoping we're in that area of expansion.
We're certainly taking everything into consideration moving forward. And like I say, geographic even coverage is very important, but making sure that we service the right population levels as well. So all of that's taken into consideration for future offices.
Thank you.
Representative Wheatley, I think we're working on some language for the budget to put a Real ID office there right under that toll bridge that's going in Northern Kentucky. Okay, Senator Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you all for being here. I'm going to apologize up front. I'm a older senator and didn't turn that second phone off when I came in here. I got 2 of them. It's all right. When you get old. But I want to bring to transportation a different perspective from mine. I'll give you an example. As a lawyer, and I'm sure there's some other people in there, lawyers, you look at the newspaper and see how many people are driving without license and get cited to court. We're clogging the court system up. I don't think the circuit court clerks are going to lay somebody off because you take out driver's license. I called this morning just to see how long it'd take them to answer me on the way down here. 8 minutes. During this pandemic, the courthouse wouldn't talk to you except from 9 o'clock till 2 o'clock. And I had so many people waiting outside, I felt sorry for them in the rain, everything else, trying to get driver's license renewed. Eastern Kentucky, where I'm from, is not going to be able to travel. Right now, it's 2 hours. You got one in Prestonsburg and one in Somerset, plus to get driver's license. I got 2 phone calls on the way down here today that people believe that their license renewed. One was June the 6th, they said. So I'm going to have to drive all the way to Somerset to get my license renewed. I said, I don't think so, but it's out there. And I hope the Department of Transportation would do some advertising to let people know that they can still get their license renewed. Absolutely. But you said, not jointly, but she said that we need the people to change their minds about Department of Transportation. Now, as a legislator of my district and a lawyer who sees the consequences, insurance companies want you to have your driver's license. When you go to Walmart or anywhere, they want you to have that ID driver's license anywhere. And the poor people in my area can't afford to travel these great distances. So transportation needs to do a little bit more of thinking about, we all represent people. The government's a service of the people. And that's the way I'm going to undertake it if it means drafting legislation to help these people. I had a thought process, if you're going to have a regional district, we got all these school buses that's set. Why can't they pick up the poor people that can't afford to travel to get their driver's license renewed whenever you all stop it all? And why can't the circuit court clerk's office help these poor people that can't hardly read and write to get their driver's license renewed by just going down there? They don't have computers, but now they all come to town. When you go over to the county court clerk's office to do anything from taxes or anything else, they want the ID. You go in the PVA office, you go in the sheriff's office, and the ID they have is that driver's license. So now I hope transportation takes a real thinking about what they're saying when saying, how many kids travel to Western Kentucky? Not anybody from my area. We're in the corner of the world of Kentucky. Yep. Harlan County, Letcher County. Now, Floyd County's got one. Knott County's okay because they're close. But no, Letcher and Harlan County is not going to suffer like that. And I'm going to keep a record of how many people get their license. I mean, it's real easy to get the records of how many people get cited for no operator's license. I'm going to go back and check this last year during the COVID time because it was in the newspaper all the time.
We did see that quite a bit. But we have a new office coming in Manchester soon.
That's still 2 hours away, sir.
No, we know there's a hole.
Right.
There are holes where you're addressing in those geographic areas, and they are still being looked at. No, nothing is off the table, and no decisions have been made. We've got room to add offices, and we plan to, but nothing formal yet. And as for the confusion about those circuit clerks have not been transitioned yet, and they are per the Supreme Court guidelines and AOC's guidelines. I don't speak for them, but they are seeing people for renewals and seeing people to finish out their duties until we transition them. We're certainly not aiming to transition them immediately, and we will keep that in mind. We did clarify, I think there was an article in the media that had not that we had put out, but an article in the media, and we did clarify as recently as last week that those circuit clerks were still issuing driver's licenses. They haven't been transitioned.
And with the online renewal coming available for anybody that does have internet and is comfortable with technology, they'll have that option. And then for our pop-up portable units, we'll be coming to all of those counties that don't have regional offices and come see the people that need us to come see them.
Can I ask another question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Is there any reason, though, that we cannot use the clerk's office to continue to help these uneducated people? That's the only place they know to come to. All the grocery stores are in that same central area in eastern Kentucky. You come to the town, everything's located there. Most of them come there for their voting stuff. Is there any reason that we can't keep the clerks helping those people walk in and say, I just want to renew my driver's license?
We can certainly keep that in our transition plan to keep them involved longer. while we wait to get other offices set up. So we can definitely utilize those locations.
One more question. Can you do that voluntarily, or is it going to need legislation introduced to do that?
We can definitely do it within the allowance.
Through June 30th of 20.
Next year, through the plan, absolutely we can.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all very much.
Mm-hmm.
Next is, I think remotely, is Representative Heverin.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all so much for coming today. I greatly appreciate it. I just wanted to brag on the Bowling Green office. In April, I went and got my real ID, and it took me less than 15 minutes. And I appreciate all the work that you all are doing to make sure this gets taken care of. When I finished, I asked to speak to the manager, and they looked at me very funny. And I explained that I was a state representative, and I just wanted to brag on them. And she was like, "Oh, let me find her immediately." And so I want to brag on that office. They're very friendly, and it seems like a very daunting task to go and find all your documents. But they're very kind about it. So thank you all for the work you're doing on the ground, and just kudos to the Bowling Green office.
Thank you for the feedback. We'll make sure they get it.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, that's the last of the questions. Thank you all very much for coming today. I think just for informational purposes of the members, I think we're going to have you all kind of in the queue for every meeting of the interim. And so keep us updated, and then if there's questions that members may have going forward, that way they'll know that they're going to get some response at that point in time.
Mr. Chairman, you and Chairman Higdon had advised us you thought that. So the fact sheet we plan to bring each time we come so that you'll see the progress and the update. We'll be adding offices, adding transitioned counties, and also we do plan to bring some of the features of our next level licensing to you for a quick little 5-minute presentation. As part of our presentation, we'd like to share with you our website, how navigable it is. We'd like to share the pop-up. We'd like to bring a pop-up in and show you how it works, and the online renewal. So we have a lot planned if you'll have us, and we thank you very much.
You can be rest assured we will have you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, next is Secretary Gray is going to give us an update on the CARES Act funding.
All right, sir.
Welcome.
All right, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chairman Upchurch, Mr. Chairman Higdon, and members of the Joint Committee. I should first say thank you for your public service. I always appreciated it when somebody would tell me that when I was in the job like you all were in. First things first, I'm joined, of course, by Deputy Secretary, former Secretary Mike Hancock, and we are here to answer any questions after we make a short presentation. And I don't know if are you planning to finish up by 2 o'clock or soon thereafter? Because I was going to say if we can't get to questions,
we'll do questions. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
We're going to go.
All right, sir. So today we were asked to give an overview of 2 of the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet business units that received CARES federal funding: the Kentucky Department of Aviation and the Office of Transportation Delivery. But before I go into that too much, let me refresh the committee about this funding source, sort of a context for the Aviation Department funding and the Transportation Delivery funding. On Friday, March 27th of 2020, President Trump signed the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or the CARES Act, into law. As you know, the CARES Act provided emergency assistance and health care response for individuals, families, and businesses affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and it provided emergency appropriations to support executive branch agency operations during the pandemic. During the pandemic, there was certainly no question that transportation nationwide was hit hard. You all remember how it was almost at a standstill. We were very concerned about revenues, of course. With safety measures to encourage Americans to quarantine and reduce unnecessary interactions, we saw a drastic drop in travel on the roads and in the air, which of course impacted road fund revenues that are dependent on motor fuel taxes and vehicle fees. For KYTC, the original estimated shortfall was $160 million for fiscal 2020. It actually came in less than that at $60 million, but still a significant hit, representing just short of 10% of our expected revenues from the fuel tax and from vehicle sales fees. The federal dollars provided through the CARES Act for transportation in Kentucky were desperately needed to sustain the operations of our transit systems and airports, as well as the livelihoods of Kentuckians that keep those systems moving. Okay, so first, let me focus on public transit, then on aviation. The CARES Act provided $25 billion across the country to transit agencies nationwide to help prepare for, and respond to the pandemic. $25 billion across the country. Kentucky's $60.5 million appropriation was earmarked exclusively for the Rural Transit Funding Program. That's a Section 5311 for technical purposes. Rural transit operators serve non-urban regions with a population of 50,000 or less. The Kentucky Transportation Cabinet's Office of Transportation Delivery applied for and administered the grant funding. Now, this $60.5 million that we received does not fund the larger 3 transit agencies, and that's Lexington, Louisville, and Northern Kentucky, and small urban transit systems. So that 60.5 does not fund those. Those transit agencies were eligible to apply directly with the Federal Transit Administration to draw from a different bucket of CARES funding. For many of these public transit agencies, federal transit grant programs are the difference between staying in business and going out of business. I saw that, as many of you know. I saw that, as many of you see it, in your districts. The CARES funding was beneficial for rural transit because it required no local match, unlike traditional Federal Transit Administration grants. Much like other public modes of transportation, the pandemic left transit agencies hard hit because of the lost ridership and lost revenue. Transit drivers and other transit system employees remained on the front lines of the COVID-19 battle to maintain essential services for Kentuckians. Now, of this $60.5 million, the Office of Transportation Delivery within KYTC has applied for and received $55 million. Of the $60.5, we've received $55 million to date. $5.5 million is pending approval required by the Federal Transit Administration. That is the NEPA approval, National Environmental Policy Act approval. We were encouraged by the Federal Transit Administration to use these funds quickly and to get funds out to transit providers who need them during Kentucky's state of emergency. Qualifying transit agencies submitted funding requests to KYTC. The Office of Transportation Delivery, again within KYTC, it first focused on issuing funds to agencies to support operational and administrative expenses to ensure transit systems could remain in business in rural areas, including Appalachia. Intercity bus services were also supported to allow routes to run that connect rural areas with the larger regional system of intercity bus services. I realize there's a lot of detail here, but we were asked about this, so I'm trying to take you all through it. Operational expenses included administrative leave for employees required to self-isolate because of exposure to people infected with COVID-19. Other eligible operational expenses included the purchase of fuel and procurement of personal protective equipment, masks, gloves, disinfectants, disinfection services, and protective barriers between drivers and passengers. These were the operational expenses that were allowed. Later, the office accepted requests and issued funding for capital expense projects for new construction and renovations and equipment upgrades, such as onboard security cameras, GPS, transit vehicles, electronic ticketing, and office supplies. This funding was a lifeline to keep the wheels turning for Kentucky's 25 public transit agencies that kept Kentuckians employed and connected to critical services like medical appointments, the grocery, and even life-saving vaccine locations. So to date, $55 million has been awarded to public transit agencies that serve 108 counties. $55 million serving 108 counties. The remaining $5.5 million, I said earlier, is awaiting federal National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, approval. So we look forward, as time develops, to sharing more success stories of the impact the funding has had in local communities and confirming the approval of the remaining available funds. Now let me shift to airports. Mode of transportation that, of course, took some major hits during the worst of the pandemic. Our larger airports, Louisville, Northern Kentucky, Lexington. Lexington was down as much, I know, because I talked to the director there often, was down as at its worst level, was down 70%. State of Kentucky received about $77 million in April of 2020 to provide relief to the aviation industry. That money was intended to offset losses and expenses incurred by general and commercial airports while keeping workers employed and airport credit ratings stable. Now, this funding was above the annual Airport Improvement Program grants issued by the FAA. As you all may know, Kentucky has 57 airports. 5 are commercial airports that provide ticketed passenger service, and 52 are general aviation airports that serve private aircraft and small charter operations. 5 commercial airports, as you know, located in Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, then Louisville, Lexington, Owensboro, and Paducah. About 95% of the $77 million was appropriated by the FAA for commercial airports. That comes to about $75 million. So just to summarize that again, 95%, $75 million out of $77 million was appropriated by the FAA for the commercial airports, the 5 commercial airports. Kentucky Department of Aviation received $72,000 for use at its 4 state-owned airports. And those airports are the Capital City Airport here in Frankfort, Lake Barkley State Park, Rough River, and Kentucky Dam Village State Park. Calvert City is unique, Kentucky Dam. Management for that airport has been turned over to Calvert City, but the Kentucky Department of Aviation still administers their grants due to FAA restrictions regarding land ownership. So of this $72,000 earmarked for the 4 state-owned airports, the majority of that money went to the Capital City Airport in Frankfort, $69,000. The other 3 state parks each received $1,000. As I mentioned earlier, the bulk of the CARES funding was allocated for commercial airports and general aviation airports. KDA, the Kentucky Department of Aviation, does not provide or have oversight of how that money is spent at these airports. Classified general aviation airports are owned mainly by local governments, so the money is granted directly to the airport board. The CARES funding is a reimbursement program, and federal funding covered 100% of the projects. So this is a big win for our airports, as they normally must provide a 10% local match. We didn't have to do that local match in this case. And Representative Smith, I've got the answer for that other question you had earlier. And for context now, in 2019, KDA spent $1.4 million providing this match. We didn't have to provide that match for these airport funds. Thanks to the relief from local matching funds, KDA has, Kentucky Department of Aviation again, within KYTC, has programmed an additional $1 million for projects across the state. Now, this is where a study was done a few years ago which said which suggested that tens of millions of dollars in needs were identified. Now, while the pandemic hit the aviation industry hard, there are promising signs of recovery. Domestically, airlines are back to about 90% of pre-COVID numbers. And this is actually ahead, significantly ahead of industry predictions just a few short months ago. So, wrapping things up, without the CARES Act money, we would probably be in the process of rebuilding or resurrecting or breathing new life into much of our transit and aviation industries in Kentucky. We're fortunate for the funding to have kept these critical modes of transportation in operation during the pandemic and poised for future growth as we continue to come out of the pandemic. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes this update, and we will take any questions that you may have. And if we have to go to subject matter experts, Mike and I have already agreed that we'll come back to you. We'll do our best, though.
That sounds great. Hey, was there another $150 million outside of the CARES Act?
Yeah, that's the coronavirus response to CRRSAA funding that came in December of 2020.
Right.
And that total was $164 million and change. And then we discounted that. 14, almost 15 million was allocated to Kentucky's MPOs. That left $150 million right on the dot that you just said, Chairman. $150 million, $102,000 available for KYT's statewide use. And that's what Representative Smith, that you asked about whether or not the federal match was required, and it is not.
So that we've not really put that to use yet, have we?
What the plan is to apply it to the federally funded projects so that we get the most leverage out of it.
Right. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you. Are there any questions, Senator Higdon?
Just a comment. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for your work. And we have a lot of wants and needs in the transportation sector, and you're always accessible, and we appreciate that. Thank you all for the work you do.
Well, you all will be pleased to know that we're just about to cross $1 billion in awarded projects since this administration, since Governor Beshear has been in office. And I believe, Mike, in April we had our lettings were $280 million. So we're on the path. We're on a good path, good flight path for getting those numbers up again.
Just don't crash.
All right, sir.
We've got, let's see, Representative Fleming, I think, has a question.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you all very much for coming in and give us an update on both of those particular areas. And my questions in regards to the aviation, obviously you might know the Speaker and the President put together a Aviation Aerospace Caucus, which will be going through under the leadership of Senator Higdon and as well as Representative Dixon, as well as Chairman Upchurch, and going through and looking at aviation as totality. As y'all probably know, we've got over 600 businesses in Kentucky, exporting about $10.85 billion out. It's just really, really significant, and I appreciate the quick synopsis of the CARES Act and what the chairman mentioned about the $150 million going to help out aviation. But there's also collateral issues that we need to think about, and I know that money went to the core, I guess, commercial aviations, but there's a lot, as you mentioned, 52 general aviation airports we need to look at and sustain and so forth, or help out. Could you give us an idea on what CARES Act or even the rescue plan might be coming down the pipe and helping out the aviation and those collateral support infrastructure needs for the aviation? There's a lot that goes into this community. When I say community, I mean the Commonwealth. Can y'all expand or give me some quick synopsis of what you see coming down the pipe with the federal money as well as the state to help those businesses that affect aviation, which is obviously a really significant industry in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, Representative Fleming, let me mention one thing. I may have misspoken on the numbers. We're actually receiving the $150 million from the last funding is directed to KYTC overall, not specifically to airports or aviation. And in terms of maybe Mike, in terms of the original $60 million, and we 50.5 million of that, and then another 5.5 was for the commercial airports.
With Secretary, if I could, and
Yeah.
and Representative Fleming, it's important, and you bring up a great point. Looking down the road, what happens with general aviation airports into the future? I mean, commercial aviation received a nice boost through the CARES Act. They carry most of the passenger movement in Kentucky, so with the passenger volumes being off, obviously the CARES Act was there to help them. But with general aviation airports, they didn't see a lot of money from the CARES Act. Big picture, long term, though, the needs are there. Much, if not all, of virtually all of the state aviation fuel tax money we get gets channeled back into projects for general aviation airports. But as you know, that's not a huge amount, and we're always fighting uphill that particular battle. So as we look at the future infrastructure plans that Congress may have, we're incredibly hopeful and encouraged when we look at some of the numbers that they have put out there over the last several months. So we're hopeful, and that industry in Kentucky, general aviation in general, but the aviation industry in Kentucky is certainly something that we've got to pay very close attention to. It's near and dear to all of us, big picture, long term. And so we appreciate the work the Aviation Caucus is doing.
Yep. One more follow-up question, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know. I mean, it's going to be up to the chair and the caucus in terms of where we want to take things and so forth. And we're talked about 3 different categories in terms of how we can focus on things and so forth. But could you, and this is sort of an off rail question, but there is a consortium that was put together several years ago, Aviation Consortium. Can you shed any light on that? Are they operating? Are they doing anything? Do they exist anymore? Do you know anything about that?
I'm not. We're willing to learn.
We are too. I just didn't know because I've asked several people. I can't get anything. People don't know. So I was like, well, y'all the secretary, so y'all know.
I know that there was some work done to examine the improvement needs in among our general aviation airports, and that those numbers I referenced earlier in the tens of millions. I don't think it's Mike. Do you remember that number? We'll get that number too. That'd be a good one for the committee that you referenced earlier.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, next, Senator Higdon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Gray and Deputy Secretary Hancock. On this past session in our budget, not a lot of people probably realized, and I wanted to talk about it, that we some of the money, we have a lot of tax expenditures that come out of our transportation fund that pay for things really outside of transportation, and we've really worked to try to draw some attention to that and get put those expenses back where they belong instead of coming out of the road fund. They started doing that years ago when the road fund had plenty of money. That's not the case anymore, and over $200 million per, budget cycle is coming out for other purposes. So we were very fortunate this time that the general fund picked up the majority of the state police allotment, and gave us about another $180 million in our transportation budget, $60 million in current year for, I think, pavement maintenance, and $120 million and next year's budget go to the road fund to fund those projects. Can you give us any update on the current budget that we're using, the $60 million I think that went to pavement maintenance, and that should be I guess help a lot of people as far as getting some blacktop laid this year.
Mike, you can supplement with what I was going to say. First things first, we should say express appreciation for that, because I know it has been a long-standing issue within the cabinet, of course, because the needs have been so great, as you said, Senator, and the revenues have been challenged, as you know and others know, and I won't get on too much of a soapbox, but I promise I won't do that. But even Missouri, which was the last to adjust its revenues, has recently made adjustments in its revenues, adjustments up in its fuel, the motor fuels tax. So we are working to utilize those funds, especially for the pent-up maintenance, for backlog maintenance. That's first priority. Those numbers are, depending on who you're listening to, those numbers can be north of $1 billion. And so those revenues that you appropriated for the cabinet and released for the cabinet are genuinely appreciated. Just like I will say the addition that you made for the discretionary fund, there's not a day that goes by that we don't get calls from your county judges and many of you for support there, and so we appreciate that. Mike, you want to go ahead?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I also would. Secretary said it very well. Those monies that have come in the current year appropriation, we are moving toward paving projects. Another big chunk that was absolutely necessary, particularly this spring as we had the torrential rains and other issues, landslides and rock falls across our state. We've had roads closed this spring because of a variety of those, and so a lot of that money, I think it was $15 million of that, is actually being directed to rock falls and landslide projects around the state to try to correct things so that these aren't recurring rock falls and landslides, which they tend to be in many areas. So trying to put that money to great use, immediate use, try to get it out there on the street and paving projects, and many of those I think are already done, but it's very much something that's greatly appreciated, as the Secretary said.
Mr. Chairman, one other comment. This work we did in this budget that we were fortunate we did 2 one-year budgets, so we got to go back and have this conversation as you talk about a need for additional revenue. There's been a real pushback for us to go capture that money that's coming out of the transportation fund to fund stuff outside of transportation. So that was part of it this year, the $180 million that the general fund picked up for state police. We're going to be having a conversation about some of those other dollars that are leaving the transportation account and paying for other things, and we'll be having that conversation later. But if anybody wants to, we talk about funding. Today we're collecting the same amount of tax on fuel as we did in 2011. And consumption is about the same as it was in 2011. So you get the same tax and the same consumption. We haven't had really any increase in revenue since 2011. So those conversations are warranted because we do have a lot of pent-up demand. So we'll have those as we continue forward.
And Mr. Chairman, as you have noted before, at the same time that revenues have been flat, highway construction costs have increased up until last year, had increased 35% in the last 10 years. And with escalations that are underway today, that number is likely to go another 10%, which means that you've got lines that are intersecting in a bad way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. It looks like we have one more question, Senator or Representative Odell Smith.
Mr. Secretary, we mentioned just a few minutes ago in our conversation the bridge in Ohio, and I want to go on record to say that any way that I can support that by letter or to our congressman. Right now, I know in Washington they're discussing infrastructure. I think this is the time that we need to come together as a state and put a request in. I have truckers in my district that have contacted me and asked me to look into fixing the bridge. They're concerned with the bridge. They go across it every day in transportation. And I want you to know that even though I'm in Eastern Kentucky, I support the project in any way I can in form of a letter or phone calls. I want you to know that I support it. And I think it's important to our state. So I just want to make that statement and go on record.
Thanks, Representative Smith. I can say, just as a footnote quickly, that when we were up there fixing the bridge after the fire, the one thing I heard repeatedly was that when that bridge was down, 3% of the nation's GDP goes across that bridge annually. 3% of the nation's gross domestic product represents, I did the math on it, it took me a while, but I got it done, and it represents about $600 billion a year goes across that bridge. Big numbers.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. I know you've got
Thank
a
you
big
all.
job ahead of you. I think that does conclude the meeting. I will remind everyone that the next meeting is July the 6th at 1 p.m. In this room, and it will also be available for video conference if if you want to meet remotely, you'll be able to do that as well. So, and then on a final note, if any of the members have any topics that they would, they want to bring before the committee, probably the last meeting of the interim or close thereabout, we can do a rapid fire. If you've got something you just want to pitch out to the committee, give everybody a couple of minutes that has something, we'll try to work that in. So, with